Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldron. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? What is it? It's Monday. Yes, it's Monday. Happy Monday, everybody. It's also our first show of February. It's Monday, February 3rd, 2020. It is, what do we call it? Super Bowl Monday? We would if we could, but we'll be sued if we do. That's kind of a nice rhyme. Okay. Well, anyway, congratulations go out, of course, to the great state of Kansas, I guess. I don't want to rob them of the celebration. I'm sure that they're happy in Kansas about Kansas City having won the gigantic game that you're not supposed to mention or something unless you pay them. I don't really know how that whole thing works. How do you get famous? All right. Well, anyway, I thought any mention of your name was good. All right. Well, all publicity is good publicity. Good publicity for Kansas, even though that's not where most of Kansas City is. There is a Kansas City, Kansas, of course. There's part of it in there. Not the worst mistake the president has ever made. Actually, accepting the presidency would probably be the worst. Lots of other things going on, too. I don't know if that's going to take up all our time talking about the fact that he tweeted originally that he thought Kansas City was in Kansas. I guess it's an easy mistake to make. And really, honestly, I don't see why Missouri should be able to lay claim to two football teams anyway, so I'm a little annoyed about that whole thing. Although, this is how out of it with football I am. And, St. Louis, are they no longer in? I can't even remember. For a while they were in St. Louis, they went back and forth. The Rams move all over the place. They went back and went. I don't remember what happened. I never really paid attention to the Rams, certainly. Anyway, fun game, well played. I guess, I sort of rooted for Kansas City, I guess. I didn't really care very much one way or the other. But I sort of rooted for them because, they don't win the Super Bowl all that often. And so, I was more excited for them. Most of my youth, the San Francisco 49ers were winning all the time. So who cares? Wasn't really super exciting to see them win again. It's a totally different group of people, but whatever. What's the difference? Anyway, other things happened over the weekend. Other things did not. We didn't finish up the impeachment trial of the President of the United States. That didn't end. That goes on today, tomorrow, and into Wednesday, I think, is the current schedule. I guess we've got the State of the Union address, kind of, coming up. He's allegedly the president, and he'll give a speech, although why they invited him to do it, I don't know. Brexit happened while we weren't looking. They actually, I guess, sort of got that done. I saw some video of some functionaries at the European Union headquarters of some kind. I don't know what they have going on there. I've seen it, but who knows which building it was. But they were removing the British flag from the hallway. The definition of unceremonious. It was just two people in blue blazers walked out there and took the flagpole down and folded up the flag, but just like they were folding up a dish towel. I don't know if the British have I assume they have some sort of protocol, the flag folding protocol. I don't know if it's the same as it is in the United States where they make the triangle out of it or not, or whether we borrowed that from them. I guess the European Union people don't care. You're not part of the European Union, so we're not particularly interested in what your flag protocol is. It's just kicking you out. Who cares? Get lost. So far, so good, I guess, for Brexit. Nothing has collapsed into rioting, shortages of medicine or food or anything like that. But that's going to take some time till they get around to that. Just looking around in Pocket, and actually, there's a page that I guess gets generated in Firefox that recommends other stories in Pocket. And maybe I should spend the 2 hours on this story. This one caught my eye because it has a wacky cartoon rendering for its illustration. Confessions of a Professional Fake Shopper. I thought that was kind of interesting. It says, when desperate store owners want to convince passersby to stop in, they hire fun, happy people to pose as shoppers, I guess. and they're actually out-of-work actors, retirees, and the writer of this particular piece, whose name is, by the way, Sam Dunnington. Where did they write it? I don't know. It's just in pocket. Don't ask me. Anyway, what an interesting thing. Every once in a while, a consumer trend like that becomes very interesting, and you can't believe that that's really true. I'll read that later. I won't bother you with it. Many other things that we could be rounding up today. And let's see, are all my gadgets properly switched on? Yes, okay. So I can check in on the large raft of stories that Greg has lined up. We'll wait for him to discuss them, of course, but lots to catch up on. Also, the Iowa caucuses, which everyone loves and are totally democratic and everyone likes to wait in line for or whatever, also coming on Tuesday. And I am dismayed to find out that the Virginia primaries come up much sooner than expected. I guess we're about 4 weeks out from that. I don't think we're Super Tuesday. We're mildly good Tuesday, I guess. But I guess that's coming, and unless you all make the selection for me, I'm going to have to make some choices. So let's see if we can get on that and narrow it down to one thing and one thing only for me to make it easy for me. I'll be happy with almost anybody. I suppose there are a few people that can make me unhappy. Not one of them, Greg Dworkin, though. So good morning, Greg.
Good morning.
Make me happy. Hello. How are you?
So I guess if you're from San Francisco, then you're wearing your "By Grabthar's Hammer by the Sons of Warven, You Shall Be Avenged" shirt today, because I guess you're going to be disappointed. And if you're from Kansas City, which, by the way, is in Missouri, then you'll be fairly pleased.
It's in Puerto Rico, as far as I know.
Well, you know, born in the USA.
Part of the big story of the Super Bowl. Jennifer Lopez reminding the President of the United States.
And Shakira.
Yes, that it's actually part of the United States. And I wonder how many complaints.
Not only that, they had the youth choir in little cages.
Is that right? I didn't actually see the performance except
I
for
didn't either, but I watched it.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
That's what you do. That way you could watch the halftime, and then you could watch the commercials. Wow. My favorite, of course, was the Bill Murray Groundhog Day commercial.
Yeah, that was a big hit. I found the Google commercial a little weird and creepy, but my wife loved it.
Anyway, so those are the things that matter. But, of course, right afterwards, Donald Trump tweets,
President,
congratulations to the great state of Kansas, which, of course, he scrubbed and then got rid of. And naturally, everybody on Twitter put Sharpies next to it to make sure that it was a little bigger. And I guess, Twitter is saying things like Josh Hawley's going to introduce legislation to make sure that Kansas City moves to Kansas or maybe Israel or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's never wrong, and you can't allow him to be wrong, so you have to fix everything afterwards. Now, speaking of that, there was some pretty amazing work by BuzzFeed, which got a whole bunch of emails about the time that Trump claimed Alabama was at risk from a hurricane. And it was bad. I mean, I have some examples of it, but Craig McLean was pretty clear about things. The best I can tell is this press release is a product of the public affairs machinery. Craig McLean is Assistant Administrator, Oceanic and Atmospheric Research at NOAA.
Yes. Everyone
Please don't tell me, he writes, that the quality review of the performance of the agency's technical expertise of our scientists in NOAA, including the National Weather Service forecasters, will now reside in the hands of the public affairs apparatus of either NOAA or DOC, Department of Commerce, I guess.
Yes.
Remarkably, our forecaster signs his work, at least as critics should too. What concerns me most is this administration's eroding the public trust in NOAA for an apparent political recovery from an ill-timed and imprecise comment from the president. I hope that NOAA's trust in the public eye will outlast this administration, but until then I harbor a great concern for all scientists, science missions, and the quality of our public communications about our research, in that a spurious press release may accompany any future scientific conclusion, be it a weather forecast, climate study, or an ocean and fisheries forecast. This is an alarm bell that needs to sound inside the agency around the false profit of stewardship from the Department of Commerce and outside the agency. Most important is that our employees need to know we stand for science, not politically motivated apologies. That's about as clear as it gets in terms of discussing that.
Yes.
My own Senator Blumenthal was just about the only public official to weigh in terms of writing about this, hoping that this stuff doesn't get politicized. And there's regular folks, just regular old folks, from the public writing in and saying, what's going on here? A weak person as this president has shown that he is, never admits to saying or doing anything wrong. It's the exact opposite of what they believe is to be strong, et cetera, along those lines. And it's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah, I did happen to see that. I thought I may have stored that away, but more excellent FOIA work being done uncovering those emails. And,
which is a reminder, of course, that everything about the Ukraine scandal, not the Ukraine, it's Ukraine, but the Ukraine scandal is going to come out. And so all those senators who decided that they didn't really want to know more are going to look worse and worse as time goes on. Of course, my favorite probably is an overheard conversation with John Kerry about the 2020 election.
Yes.
Which
what happened there?
What's the relationship? Well, Kerry was overheard speculating about what would happen if he ran in 2020 in a hotel bar, because everybody knows if you want to have a private conversation, the best way to do it is, at a favorite lunch place in D.C. or on the Acela Quiet car, or all these other places where you can be overheard. So Kerry got mad and he tweeted, but then retracted, just like Trump retracted. But Kerry retracted this one, so you have to get the screenshot to see it. As I told the reporter, I'm absolutely not running for president. Any report otherwise is effing, except he used the word, or categorically false. I've been proud to campaign with my good friend Joe Biden, who's going to win the nomination, beat Trump, and make an outstanding president. And I predicted from that on Wednesday, because the sequence is going to be today closing arguments, and then probably this afternoon and all day tomorrow, senators get to stand up and bloviate, and then Wednesday the actual acquittal. So I'm predicting Lisa Murkowski is going to stand up in the well of the Senate and say, I was going to vote for witnesses and to impeach and convict Trump until John Kerry said the F word on Twitter, and now I can't.
That's just terrible. Also, I was insulted by the halftime show.
Yes, also. But, I voted for witnesses because I knew John Kerry was going to use the F word.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't after that. I just couldn't.
Well, she's very delicate. And
she had to protect John Roberts.
True. That's true. You didn't want to leave it up to him, and he would embarrass himself by being relative. Well, by doing nothing, which is also bad, but also doing nothing in a partisan way, which makes it only that much worse. But
speaking of partisan way, there's data from the NBC Wall Street Journal poll. Donald Trump abused his power as president by asking a foreign government to investigate a political opponent to influence the upcoming presidential election to his advantage. Do you believe that statement, or you do not believe that statement? And of the public, 52% believe it, 41% don't. That's an 11-point gap. What's interesting is the second one. Donald Trump obstructed Congress by not cooperating with their impeachment investigation and directing government officials not to comply with subpoenas which legally required them to testify. 53% believe that, 37% don't. Okay, in other words, the public fully understands what Chuck Todd and everybody else was trying to push as a weaker impeachment resolution. But the gap between believing it and not believing it is bigger for that second one than for the first one. It's much easier to understand that Donald Trump was not allowing anybody to testify and was obstructing stuff. That's totally innately understandable to the public. The part about the foreign government to investigate, how much do we do this? I believe he did it, but how bad is it? That's a little trickier. Although the public believes that too. I mean, that 1-point gap is a pretty big win if you were running in an election. But it's much bigger. It's a 16-point gap for the second one. So the so-called weaker one is actually the one that the public understands a whole lot better. And that'll give you an idea of the quality of the political commentary and analysis we get these days from folks.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's bad and there's really bad. I was reminded of maybe the worst example. Will Bunch was just retweeting this weekend saying, it blows my mind that this is actually was out there. Was it Kathleen Parker? But yeah,
Yes.
I guess the prior to the just
He won't
prior
do
to
any
the
of those things, she wrote, the
Yeah.
Pulitzer Prize winners.
Wow.
He won't do this, he won't do that, he won't build a wall, he's not going to cut back immigration. Don't worry about it. He's just bloviating.
There'll be good people around him that'll. Oh, and the House and Senate will keep him in check because that's the way our system works.
Yes,
Yeah, that was
exactly.
pretty amazing. Okay,
Waiting
well,
for the follow-up on that one.
you all should just go out and just tell people you're pundits from now
On
on.
a separate note, I have this for you that I haven't given you yet, but it's in the Pundit Roundup.
You've given us all that then.
And it's a great story. It's a process story in the end.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and this happens in Virginia.
Uh-oh. And I don't know about it, probably.
And it's this story from Roanoke.com. Okay, General Assembly notebook. Lynchburg legislator learns to beware of what you ask for. And the story is Delegate Wendell Walker, Republican of Lynchburg, introduced a bill at the start of the General Assembly session calling for the removal of the statue of former Governor and U.S. Senator Harry F. Byrd from Capitol Square.
Oh.
And the reason he put that in there, he says, was political.
Oh.
Because Ralph Northam, who's currently the governor, made remarks about his support for allowing local governments to remove Confederate monuments, as well as creating a commission to recommend a replacement of the statue of Robert E. Lee that Virginia contributed to the U.S. Capitol grounds. So with all the talk of taking down statues, Walker decided to file his bill about Byrd. He acknowledged it was tit for tat rather than about a statue. And Byrd, for those who don't know, Harry Byrd, is considered the architect of massive resistance, a set of policies that aggressively push back against racial integration of public schools following the landmark U.S. Supreme Court ruling Brown v. Board of Education. So I'll let Josh Chafez summarize here, who's a visiting professor at Texas Law. He's from Cornell, so he's a carpetbagger.
That's why he's visiting. Yes. Okay.
Right? What I truly love about this is the extent to which Delegate Walker tells on himself by just assuming that most Democrats would privilege party over ideology. And then when a bunch of Democrats would say, because the delegate assumed that, oh, this is horrible. You can't take down one of ours. Obviously, it's all politics, so let's just rescind the whole concept. But no, that's not what the Democrats said. The Democrats said, yeah, obviously the statue of that racist bastard Byrd has to go.
Well, all right.
When he heard that, the delegate tried to withdraw the bill because that's not what he had intended. He just wanted to make a political statement. And the Democrats said, we'll vote for your bill.
Oh, well.
And he was embarrassed and he wanted to withdraw it. And here's the kicker.
Yeah.
And Chavez writes at the end, and God, I love legislative procedure. The House of Delegates Rules Committee has refused to allow him to withdraw it.
Yeah, sorry.
Remember, if you have the gavel, you can do all sorts of cool stuff.
I guess that's true. Yeah, I'm surprised that they. Well, all right, good. Yeah, don't let them withdraw it. Fine, use the gavel that way and
Get rid of the statue. That'd be great.
It's not a great statue or anything. I mean, he's just standing there in a suit, doing nothing.
He's not carrying a gun or anything. You know?
Right.
So get rid of it.
Not exciting if you put him on a
It's not
horse.
like it's Kentucky.
Right. What? Okay. Well, that's a
You
good
heard
one.
about Kentucky with all the gun rights guys were allowed.
Oh, yes, right.
Sure.
Yes, of course, I did.
And when they went in, of course, they were told, go around the metal detector. You don't need to do that.
I
Everybody
can see
else
your
who
gun.
doesn't have a gun, you have to go through the metal detector because you might have a gun.
It's
but those of you who
interesting,
have
wasn't
guns,
it?
you can go right
just
around.
go right around. That must have been the most amazing thing in the world to be after those guys and to start walking around and be told, no, what are you doing?
The old, Ulu knife from Alaska. Who knows?
A lot of, there was a lot of commentary on that. And of course, somebody finally did put pictures side by side of the Kentucky State Police, I guess, waving people around the metal detectors with their giant guns, but also a lineup of Capitol, whatever they call their Capitol Police there. I guess they might be state police, lined up and blocking the entry for the Poor People's Campaign. They wouldn't allow them even to go through the metal detectors. You're not allowed in. You're too scruffy and gross. And they were shoulder to shoulder in their uniforms, blocking the entry of the Poor People's Campaign. But bring your guns. Yeah, those were some amazing pictures, including the guys who were masked as well as carrying guns.
Well, you know how the the senators had to leave their phones in bins and cubbies before they went in for this impeachment trial.
Yes, right.
They should have had bins and cubbies there, and then as you go through the metal detector
As well. Yes.
You put your gun in the bin, and then you go through a metal detector, and then on the other side, the Capitol Police hands you a squirt gun.
Yeah.
One of those little plastic see-through water guns we had as kids that looked like ray guns from Flash Gordon.
Yeah, or the ones.
And you can carry this as your point of, protest, and then you can get your gun back when you go out.
I guess so, or we might melt them. Yeah, that was an astonishing thing, and whatever. That's Kentucky for you. I also did notice that some of the pictures highlighted the guys in masks, but they were also wearing their name tags that you have to wear. That's the cops were cracking down. You have to put your name on a name tag to get in.
Banks should have that,
Yeah.
If you want to come in and rob the bank, you need a name tag. You can't do it without a name tag. I'm sorry, it's policy says so right here on page 9.
Yes. You don't want to break
no bank
protocol.
robberies without name tags. You have to have, hello, my name is, give me your money, and then you just write your name in there.
Yes.
Or maybe even put your picture. Got to have an ID, right?
Right.
I mean, you're wearing a mask, but you got to have an ID.
You could probably spoof that system. What's your name? Okay, Robert. Here you go. No, not Robert. Just Robert.
Robin.
Oh, all right. As in, I'm
First
robbing
name is
you.
Robin.
Put this in the
last
bag.
name is the bank.
Well,
Yes,
they'd
Mr.
write
Bank,
that out.
It's
an
fill that
AI
right into
bot
and
making the
go over
badges.
there
He doesn't
to teller number 2. That seems to be empty at the moment.
Okay.
Shortest line.
Easy access. Okay. Wow. Well, a lot of action from the state capitals today.
Yeah. So, it's again, perhaps it's just a sly, subtle point of trying to say, the state capitals matter. It isn't just the presidency. Democrats for too many years have not been paying attention to the Supreme Court and not been paying attention to local races, 2000 and other things that, kind of decide census. This stuff's important, and it's really important that you get out the vote. And speaking of get out the vote, we got a Iowa caucus today. And, of course, you have to start the Iowa caucus by talking about the Des Moines Register poll screw-up.
Oh, yeah. Right. Well, you sure do.
I do.
Yeah.
So what happened?
I don't know.
Well, Politico writes
Exactly.
right before that, the most consequential poll in politics is about to be released. This is about an hour or two before it was about to be released. But pollsters are trying to downplay expectations for the final pre-caucus Iowa survey from the Des Moines Register. The Ann Seltzer poll,
one.
the gold standard of polls. And they decided to super-duper hype it this year. And CNN was going to have, at 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock when Central, they were going to have an hour presentation where they didn't really tell you what the poll was until like 57 minutes in.
Pre-gaming the poll.
That way you watch their commercials for an hour. And there was a whole hour-long get-to-the-point-already presentation planned. And then right before the poll, they pulled it.
That part I heard.
The anticipated Iowa caucuses poll shelved over possible errors. At least one Iowan interviewed reportedly wasn't read the full list of candidates. One operator had apparently enlarged the font size on their computer screen. This is from the Pundit Roundup, a report by Ariel Edwards-Levy, who is from the old HuffPost pollster and is now their polling editor.
Okay.
One operator had apparently enlarged the font size on their computer screen, perhaps cutting off Mr. Buttigieg's name from the list of options at times reported, noting that because the list of candidates is randomized between interviews, Buttigieg may not have been the sole candidate affected. The pollsters weren't immediately able to determine the extent of the problem before the polls planned and much hype released on Saturday night. So actually, you can go back and check and see what's going on and see which reports came from the operator in question, whether you can even go back and check and see if other operators did this. There's a way to do all of this, but not when you're on a 3-minute deadline because it's going to be on live TV and everybody's watching you and you told everybody to watch CNN. They didn't have time to do that, so they pulled it, which is what responsible pollsters do. Of course, that immediately started the conspiracy theories that, you're only doing that because Bernie was ahead.
Right.
People started publishing leaked results, which may or may not be true. And so it was a mess, but in some ways it was a good mess. I'm kind of pleased that there isn't a gold standard poll telling us what's going to happen tonight.
Yeah.
Why don't we just watch what happens tonight?
Is it tonight and not tomorrow? I don't know. I can do it. I don't know.
Tomorrow
Maybe.
is State of the Union.
Okay.
Wednesday
that would be difficult,
is
wouldn't it?
the impeachment vote. And so,
yeah, okay.
it's part of that is the expectations game, because it isn't really whether you win or not in Iowa. And what does winning even mean?
It is tonight.
Here's a reminder. In tonight's 3 results, there's first alignment,
Right.
which is
yes.
what everybody says they're going to do when they first show up. There's final alignment, which is what happens when you rejigger everything if your candidate, including uncommitted, didn't get 15% of the vote. And then there's delegate equivalence, which is what the final alignment is assigned to. It is theoretically possible for a candidate to win one but not the other 2. So there may be 3 winners. There may be all 1 winner because Bernie blows everybody away. It may be that everybody's tied. So don't worry if it's confusing, because Nevada's going to do the same thing.
Okay.
And that caucuses are a nightmare.
Oh. Yeah, well, that's true. Caucuses
Yeah.
are terrible. We had a lot to say about that.
So that's what's coming.
Great.
And so now we're going to do that in the context of the Des Moines Register not telling us who's going to win, so we just have to watch. And here's some data from Pew Research and some data from John Della who does the Institute of Politics at Harvard's youth poll.
Oh, yes.
But first, Pew, who participated in Iowa's 2016 caucuses?
Iowa.
So among Iowans in 2016,
yes.
30% of the population were registered Democrats, 30.3. 31% of the population were all registered Republicans, 31.8. Not registered with the Democratic or Republican parties, 37.9, the biggest chunk.
Okay.
They can't participate.
They can't.
Now, the Holy Grail is to get them.
Yeah.
But if you get them, you don't know who they're going to vote for.
Right.
So we'll continue this after the break.
Uh-huh.
But the point I'm trying to make is that Democrats themselves, if every Democrat voted, it's still only 30% of Iowans.
Yes. Well, that's sort of the way it is with these things. But add to it the trouble of caucusing, and you can really, you can pretty much throw that whole process out. But people seem
only a sliver of registered Democrats actually participate.
Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. It's caucus day. Turns out to be true. And I guess they were on Monday last time, so I guess it's the thing. I'm not in Iowa. I couldn't tell you. I guess I just figured they were Tuesday like they would do for primaries, but if they were doing it like they did primaries, they would be having a damn primary instead of this caucus. So Monday night, good night to...
They start meeting about 7 o'clock Central, which is 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock.
They don't have the time right.
8 o'clock Eastern,
right,
and we should know by about 10 o'clock what's going on.
Them too, I guess.
If not 11.
Right. Stand over here if you want to know at 11, and stand over here if you think you'll know by 10.
And then you do bragging rights. And of course, the problem is that without the Des Moines Register poll, we really don't quite know what's going on. The CBS News Battleground Tracker was out yesterday morning. It's got Biden and Bernie at 25, and Buttigieg at 21, and Warren at 16, and Klobuchar at 5.
So I assume it's
and if that's
almost
true,
that.
Klobuchar did not make any surge. If that's true, that means that her votes probably go to Biden. That doesn't mean that Biden wins. The trouble with that kind of poll is if that's an expectation setter, I was all about expectations. So the whole idea is you have to do better than people thought. That means that if this poll has 25 for Biden and 25 for Bernie, and Bernie, let's say, wins by 6, that would be considered a big win for him.
Yes, of course.
Right? And, if this is an expectation setter, it's terrible for Biden because now it's like he's supposed to be one of the co-winners or within, striking distance of first. That's not what he wants. He wants to be Warren. You want to be in fourth in these polls and then finish second. You don't want to be second in these polls and then finish fourth.
No. Well, you don't want to go the other direction, certainly.
If you're Amy Klobuchar and you finish fourth, that's a tremendous win for her. So, again, it's all about expectations, even though she finishes fourth. So, without the DMR gold standard of expectation setting, now you don't have any of that stuff. And you just have to decide who won based on who won, which is really bad for the pundits because, that's not what they do.
And then all of that, we were saying right before the break, all of that is based on only this narrow slice of Iowa to start with.
Right. To go back to that, only 30% of Iowans are registered Democrats, and only 30% of them show up in the caucuses. Now, John Della Volpe had some interesting data that he was posting
That even seems like
about the 2018 election.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite interesting. And he said basically it was only 2018 when pundits rolled their eyes and said, young people don't vote, always disappoint, can't be counted on. And then Gen Z and millennials doubled their turnout rate.
Well, good.
They went from 18 to 33 from 2014 to 2018. So we're only looking at midterms there.
Okay. Midterms
and they increased their share, and they switched 10 seats from Republicans to Democrats. So who knows what happens in the Iowa caucuses, but don't discount youth. In other words, if young people show up, good for Bernie, good for the Democrats overall later on. The downside of that is caucuses are so difficult after working all day, you don't always have time to go ahead and start participating at 6:30 or whenever it is they start.
Yeah. That's the downside of the whole thing.
18.5% of all registered voters, both Republicans and Democrats in their respective caucuses, participated in the 2016 caucuses. So you got a less than 20% participation, but still 20% participation. So we'll see what happens there. And somebody answering Della Volpe said something along the lines of, are you suggesting millennials should be credited with the 2018 blue wave? What about the suburban women? If memory serves correctly, the R to D flip seats were in collar counties. And yes. Della Volpe says, well, the partisan switch from Republican to Democrat in 2018 was plus 24 for young voters.
Wow. All right.
And the overall electorate switch was 14. No group switched more than young voters. No group increased turnout more than young voters. Suburban women were very important along with others, but youth participation was critical and added 2 points to the Democratic margin. So all of these people making fun of young people for not voting, get off my lawn.
Is that a young person kicking us off the lawn? What was that?
Okay, boomer. Whatever you want to say, the fact of the matter is the youngs are showing up. They are. And they're not even going to be youngs pretty soon. So they're starting to get into the habit of voting, and they're voting for Democrats. It's all good.
Right. And so you can always tell them that. The reason you're showing up to vote is because you're becoming an old.
Well, whatever. If that makes you feel better, that's fine. All
right. I don't know. I don't really need to feel
they're
better.
showing up.
Yes, good, and they're doing the right thing, and they're important, and I don't know. That's good. That's more exciting than talking about suburban people of any sort.
Yeah. The other side of the coin is I would really much rather look and see who showed up and why than tell you in advance why this person can't win and why that person can't win and why this person. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody knows nothing at this point. Let's just have them vote and show up.
Yes, well, that's what I said about the Des Moines Register poll. What are you worried about? They're voting tomorrow.
They're voting anyway. It's not going to spoil that, so just go ahead and let them vote.
I predict that the Des Moines Register poll would have said something really close to what those other polls are saying.
Now, if 1 out of 6 caucus goers doesn't know who Pete Buttigieg is, I suppose that's a problem.
Yeah, right.
But that's different.
But yeah. And so I guess they must a Pete Buttigieg voter was on the phone.
So a Pete Buttigieg voter was on the phone and said, "Hey, you didn't ask me about my candidate," and he contacted the campaign, and the campaign contacted the pollster, and the pollster at least was able to track down relatively quickly that there was this screen problem, and then couldn't in time decide how extensive it was.
Enlarged font.
And as Mark Blumenthal, the mystery pollster, the person who created pollster.com over at Huffington Post said, I know I speak for the entire polling industry when I say there, but for the grace of God go I.
Could happen
It's the right thing to pull the poll if you're not sure.
Yeah.
And
I liked
so
it.
that's why it was pulled. No conspiracy theories about the winner because Bernie was ahead, and this is all a plot by the DNC to try to stop Bernie. There is no Stop Bernie movement. Doesn't exist.
Oh. Well, that explains
There are people
that.
that would like Bernie not to win. There's people that would like Bernie to win, but the rules aren't changing at the last minute to somehow help or hurt a specific candidate.
That's something we could certainly bring up. There are various stories circulating.
This is the classic.
Aren't true.
Don't attribute to malice what is clearly incompetence.
But if it was enlarged font, was it? I'm curious about. Was it an old who doesn't like Bernie Sanders?
Or who as somebody else put it. Well, it's obvious they couldn't pronounce Pete Buttigieg, and they were embarrassed, and so they left his name off.
I wonder if they have it phonetic on the script. I hope so.
Buttigieg.
Yeah.
Buttigieg. Pete Buttigieg.
All right.
Yeah. Hey, listen, I get phone calls at times. I try not to answer them. A lot of times it says potential spam. But if I pick it up and it's somebody from outside the area, let's say, and they say, "Are you Greg Dworkin from Newton, Connecticut?"
Nope. You got the wrong guy.
Nope. Then I get to hang up.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's a good clue for them. You got to hang up in that
Yes.
pause.
Are you from around here? Are you from Meridian, Connecticut?
Connecticut.
It's pronounced Meridian.
I'm surprised they could pronounce Connecticut, but I guess you learn that in grade school. All right.
Are you from Newton's conspiracy theory? That's what it says right here.
CT, right. Or you're scanning.
Newton MRI. I mean, what's going on here? So, we don't know exactly what happened. Some people were complaining that there wasn't complete and total transparency about the screw up. Actually, there was fairly complete transparency about the screw up, and all the pollsters tried to explain what's going on and said, I've done that. This is what happens. Yes, you can go back and check it, but you can't do it in 3 minutes when CNN is on your neck. Maybe it's a good idea not to go on CNN and try to do that stuff. That's what I would take away from it.
Yeah. For the most part, I'm sure you get the poll right, and you can do that live shot. But I don't know. Maybe there needs to be rules about the font size now, and you got to get you have eye exams for your callers. I don't know.
So Amy Walter, one of my favorite people at Cook Political, was being asked by Vox. Dylan Scott over at Vox was trying to do a Vox explainer about the Iowa caucuses.
Okay.
How are we supposed to interpret what happens in the Iowa caucuses? And Amy wanted no part of it. A lot of this will depend not just on who wins, but how close it is, what the 1, 2, 3 order is. Amy Walter at the Cook Political Report said over email. She demurred on endorsing a clear narrative. I'm not at all comfortable with the if Warren finishes third, she's dead kind of stuff. I just think it's more complicated than that. In 2004, the story wasn't only John Kerry's unexpected win, but Edwards' rise, Howard Dean's scream. Marco Rubio looked strong in Iowa to kick off 2016 and quickly faded. And Super Tuesday is just a month away. And then again, we have the other stuff, the State of the Union and the impeachment stuff. And also the complicated problem of trying to move Kansas City to Kansas.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on there.
Trying to do that over the weekend.
Yeah.
Didn't get done.
So there you go. Josh Putnam, who runs the election's big front-loading HQ, said campaigns should be tracking how widespread the support is, how many different counties are clearing 15%. You need a majority of the 3,979 up for grabs to win the nomination before the convention, and Iowa has 41. Just, again, put it in perspective. I hate Iowa going first. Yeah. I hate that it's so small a number of delegates with the outsized attention. Of course, the fact that it's an almost all-white state, and that it's done by caucus, which means a lot of people can't participate. So there's a lot of things you're on the same page about this.
Yeah.
And I've been for a long time.
Right.
But this really highlights why maybe this is the last year Iowa goes first for Democrats.
Maybe. We say that a lot, but, over the course of our history. We, haven't been on that long, but it's true. People would like to see that switched up a little bit to randomize the order, like the callers. Although, don't enlarge the font or you'll knock states off and they won't be able to express their presidential preference. But yeah, I suppose the only things going for Iowa is that caucus system. I guess the caucus system, it's not an Iowa problem. But there are Iowa problems. But the caucus system, the things that are somewhat interesting about it is I like the fact that they make you realign and choose somebody else. I really wouldn't like casting my vote that way, but I like the idea of getting an early feel for where will voters go if people drop out later, so you can kind of predict. See, it doesn't really necessarily mean that people in Missouri or Kansas feel the same way if their candidate drops out, but that's somewhat interesting. And also somewhat interesting, the idea that, you know what? Actually, there's nothing else interesting. I'm just trying to make one other thing up, but I had something else in mind.
Where is
just
Tom Delaney's third cousin twice removed going to go?
I like that. That's an interesting exercise, but nothing else, and I wouldn't want to predict anything.
Right. We don't know. So, it's close enough so we can just step back.
Telling us who wins.
I'm going to finish my segment today with talking about none of that.
Oh, all right.
And just a quick plea, and this is by Caitlin Rivers, who is a science person who does viral and infectious disease modeling.
A lot of money in that.
Yeah, but not enough.
All right.
She, in fact, writes exactly about that. Most of the modelers responding to the novel coronavirus, which is NCOV, 2019 NCOV, novel coronavirus, are doing so pro bono. There's no funding for this work. Every outbreak, they drop the work they're funded to do and volunteer their expertise to help us all to understand what's happening and how to respond. If you're not familiar with academia, this might sound underwhelming, but running a lab is a lot like running a business. These are employees to support, expenses to pay, and all the regular work, the research they're actually paid to do, still needs to get done. We can't continue to manage the scientific response to outbreaks like this. It isn't sustainable. We need super rapid funding mechanisms. She's making a plea for some kind of emergency funding or sustainment dollars. I've written with colleagues before about the importance of investing in a functional modeling capability before the outbreak begins. Novel coronavirus should underscore the necessity of that, and then gives an article she wrote in Nature about exactly that, using outbreak science and infectious disease modeling. And she says, I'm an academic myself, but fortunately I'm funded, so don't make this mistake. It's not self-serving. I'm using this privilege to highlight the difficult position of the scientists who are too humble to do so themselves. So basically they have to drop what they're doing and model this so that we can tell you that it looks like the virus number is doubling every week and that there's a whole bunch of virus out there. And it's leading to things like closing borders with China and quarantining people who come from China. And that's a big deal. Yes. And there's another big deal that I think is worth highlighting, and I have these links in the Pundit Roundup as well, about the possibility, which we want to stay away from, of stigmatizing people and pushing xenophobia. There's an article on CNN International, for example, the international panic over the Wuhan coronavirus, also known as NCOV, has taken another more familiar form, the reemergence of old racist tropes that portray Asians, their food, and their customs as unsafe and unwelcome.
Ah, okay.
Right? Oh, you're Chinese, you must be infected, that kind of thing. So there was a paywalled piece from the American Journal of Public Health that talks about this, and we've mentioned this on the show. Spanish flu, when infectious disease names blur origins and stigmatize those infected. Swine flu was difficult because the pork people complained, but Mexican flu was bad, a bad thing to call it, so we never wound up calling it that. And that's why, you don't call stuff like that. Spanish flu is historical. Hong Kong flu in 68, historical. We mentioned that because it's historical. But it was hysterical. And so we don't want to do that again. And the conclusion from this public health journal, xenophobic reactions to disease are not limited to outbreaks specifically named after a foreign country or stigmatized group. The history of infectious disease control is rife with examples of heavy-handed responses to epidemics that are assigned perfectly neutral names, but that nonetheless inspired intrusive measures against foreigners. For example, Authorities quarantined San Francisco's Chinatown while explicitly exempting non-Asian businesses during a plague outbreak in 1900. In the wake of cholera and typhus outbreaks in 1892, New York City officials selectively quarantined Jewish immigrants, and Italians arriving on the same boat were detained for only a brief time. Although stigmatizing names can exacerbate public's anxiety, they're but one example of the deeply entrenched xenophobia in public health history, and it's just something that we have to watch for and be aware of. And that's why somebody called it Chinese flu, and I jumped on them and said, don't do that.
Did you? That's, well, I haven't heard anybody actually do that yet. But people know where it's coming out of. Certainly that's a big part of the talk about it. And, I have heard some stories, some strange stories, including, I don't know where I even saw this one, but I guess it happened. And I saw a report on a train in Rome when a Chinese young man, I think 16 or so, getting on a train and people making comments. And, he's Italian. He's just of Chinese descent. He answered her in Chinese. Never been to China. Don't worry about it.
Answered in Italian.
Yeah, because he's Italian.
So he's Italian. He's never been to China.
Right.
And got big applause on the train. But it's an anecdote, not proven. We didn't have video, but it's a great story.
Then the Italian woman immediately began cooking strange bushmeat, and nobody cared. I don't know why.
Right. She was sorry, and she made dumplings for everybody on the train.
Yes,
That's what happens. So I'm going to leave you
Okay.
with the words of wisdom of Michael E. Mann, the climate scientist.
Oh, okay.
Right? Who pointed out,
Oh, my
look,
God.
it's good to have an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out. Okay? So just take that to heart. That's like a really good thing to do.
Yeah. That's well put. Okay.
Right?
I can appreciate that.
So do that with your politics
Meh.
as we see who wins tonight.
Tonight. That's right.
Right?
No Monday Night Football
for this person
tonight.
or that person, is that your candidate? What if you don't have a candidate? Well, keep an open mind, but not so much that your brain falls out.
Yes.
Take care.
Don't leave.
And on Wednesday,
Yes.
when I'm back on the show,
Right.
at that time,
Yeah.
we might have figured out who won the Iowa caucuses.
Yes, in three different
possible.
ways. Right.
We'll have to do 3 different shows.
It does take a long time, and there's also there are further realignments later on. Even that they have to go to more caucuses, and it's really crazy.
Yeah, one of the reports, I think the AP report that was describing what happens, just their headline was something about how to figure out the muddled Iowa caucuses.
Oh well, you can't.
And I think if they're muddled, get rid of them.
Yeah, right. I mean, just count the damn votes and say this is what happened.
Right.
All right. Well, that's what I say. I'm xenophobic about Iowans.
Yeah, what I'm hoping is that after the caucuses are all done and we know who won, then the gold standard Des Moines Register poll can come out and we can really see what truly happened.
Yeah, actually, that would be an interesting idea if after the fact they said, all right, well, now we'll just be totally transparent, lay it all on the line.
Yeah, exactly. This is what happened.
caucusing
This is
is
what we
done.
got.
That'd be
This
great.
is why we didn't
Good
publish it.
idea.
And by the way, we were right. Oh, I don't believe you. You jiggered it after the fact to make you. No, whatever.
I hope they do that. I would like to know. It would be a good story.
That would be interesting. Alrighty, take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
Okay, very good. Thanks. See you then. Maybe we'll impeach that president one more time in between now and then.
Maybe.
Could try it. Okay, let's see. Oh, yes, right. I remembered what the other thing was that I wanted to say about the small bit of value that I am able to get out of the Iowa caucuses. As there's, and this isn't really necessarily the best way of selecting a candidate, but I mean, it's not the worst thing I can think of. I guess drawing out of a hat would be the worst thing, or drawing, but without a hat. We were so poor we didn't even have a hat. We just threw the things on the ground and chose one at random. But I like that it is a test of organizing strength. That is, because they are such relatively low turnout events. Typically, so that if for instance, it is usually 18 to 20% of the 30% of Iowans. You're starting with a small population to begin with. Iowa, not a very heavily populated state, but not one of the smallest either. But then 30% of them are eligible to go to the Democratic caucuses, but only 20 to sometimes 30%, if you're lucky, of those of that 30% of Iowans will actually show up, and very often far less than that, especially in some of the less populated areas. It presents a tremendous opportunity if you are motivated and smart about things and have a good ground game for organization. You can make a big impact in smaller caucuses with very small numbers of people. If you can say, if there are 20 people in town in total who are interested in your candidate, and let's pick the wacky ones. I don't know. So choose one or whatever. If they're all for Andrew Yang, for instance, I don't mean to pick that on him for being wacky, but I have just done so, and I can't back out of it now. And but if you have 20 Yang supporters in town, I don't really know why that would happen necessarily. And I mean, the caucuses should reflect that if there are so many people in town. But you can have a big impact. There can still be 1,000 people in the town, and 20 is not that many. But for showing up at a caucus, that's a big deal. So I kind of like the idea of an early contest that is that emphasizes ground game and organization. But I don't think it's very helpful in predicting, who can do that nationally. And when it comes to, within 2 weeks, you're into a Super Tuesday thing where you have to divide your forces and you can't organize in the same way. And you're in primary states where organizing 20 people in a particular town doesn't really help anything either. So, it's interesting, and it tunes your organizational game and your ground game and your GOTV game. But not in any way that I don't think impacts the general election, which is really kind of the important thing. But it's got that going for it. Other than that, there's really just nothing to recommend. Caucuses, certainly not this early in the process, and in such an unrepresentative state, et cetera, et cetera. So my problems still stand, and I still like the formulation that I finally gave the thing, which the caucusing was all the fun of standing in line for hours to wait to cast your vote, but with a comments section added, so people can pester you while you're waiting to do this and tell you all the reasons, if they're not particularly nice caucus goers. And, I'm sure that experienced caucus goers are, I guess, maybe they're a little bit better, maybe they're worse, who knows, because they're just bitter at having been yelled at for many years, or maybe they're just seasoned and they know not to do it, or they know a better or more effective way of doing it. But I can't imagine, in addition to all the waiting around, being pestered the whole time, that you need to do this, or how can you dare vote for that one, and didn't you know that their second cousin once did this other thing. Over the weekend, there was also the story, the annoying story, in addition to the Des Moines Register polling thing. What was it? Oh, yes, right. I probably shouldn't even bother mentioning it, but I think you'll all get past it pretty quickly. So, I don't know, one event or another, at the mention of the name Hillary Clinton, there was some booing, and I guess Rashida Tlaib was there, along with, I think I saw Ilhan Omar also on stage with her, but and was it who else was the third panelist there? All right, well, I'll come up with it. So now I'm insulting somebody by not having their name prepared, but okay. Anyway, the booing, I guess, from the audience, and the facilitator of the event saying, I guess, sort of trying to tamp down on the boisterous response, but Rashida Tlaib saying, "Oh no, you don't have to tamp down on this. I'll boo. I'll be open about it." And I guess you get points for being open and vocal about anything. Was it Pramila Jayapal was also on the screen? I think that's now I'm sort of getting a mental picture of who was on the screen. Oh, I hope I haven't mistaken her for someone else. That would be worse. I probably should have just left it, but I think that actually was her. Anyway, I mean, I'm sure Rashida Tlaib has her reasons, and maybe they make sense to her, maybe not. I don't know. I found the whole thing rather, annoying, to say the very least. And I'll put it this way. My thought about that whole incident was more about standing around for 3 hours at an Iowa caucus, and all the people around you want to talk about that and are animated to discuss that incident. And I can't imagine anything worse, especially when you don't want to talk about that incident. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not happy about that. But then, people pointing out, here's all the good reasons why she has for disliking her. I know. That's the nature of primaries. Finding out reasons to dislike someone, but then saying, you know what, when it comes to having to cast a vote, I may cast a vote in support of such a person, regardless of their negative aspects, because I like them better on net than the others for various reasons. And that's, there's no candidate comes out of this with no negatives. But yeah, probably the biggest nightmare I can think of is having to find a way to tell people that are animated and agitated about those things, I don't want to listen to you. It's not that your point doesn't make sense. It's not that you're not allowed to have that opinion. It's I'm bothered by you personally, and I don't want to listen to you. And no, if you get a better advocate, I still won't want to listen. I don't want to hear about this particular controversy. It's not that it's invalid. It's that I have weighed it, and I don't find it persuasive in making my voting choice. And you're never going to understand that because it was persuasive in your voting choice. And you can't stand the fact that there's somebody else that comes to a different conclusion. And I can't help you. And yelling at me while I'm waiting to vote, I'm not going to say it's going to change my mind or make me more resolute in voting for nothing. It's just going to annoy me. And I don't like being annoyed. Could you stop that? And I don't know whether the people are really particularly adept at stopping that, who are regular caucus goers. Or maybe the new ones are worse. I don't know. Maybe you tell me. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. And you better vote for some other person. And I'm going to, the next hour, I'll tell you all the reasons why you're wrong about voting for this one or the other one. And go stand over in that corner instead. By the way, had I read our traditional morning tweet from Bill in Portland, Maine, I would have been reminded that, yes, the Iowa caucuses happened today. And this I know for sure because the first line of it is, the Iowa caucus happens today. And then I was supposed to deliver 2 hours of fatally flawed polling and baseless speculation that voters can count on to make the most horrendously careless decisions of their life. But I never even got that far. My decision being so much worse that I never got around to reading the morning tweet. And then I would have known from the beginning. Kate Sherrill sends along some caucus humor, because we've got a poll involved in the tweet as well, so be sure to catch it online. Listing first alignment, second alignment, viability threshold. Now, are these Iowa caucus I'm going to reverse the choices at random, you see. You do this when you're polling. Are those Iowa caucus terms or the titles of a science fiction trilogy? And it might as well be. First alignment, second alignment, viability threshold could absolutely be a sci-fi trilogy. And we should write it here on the air as an improv exercise. The caucus system. Wow. All right. Well, I think we're done dealing with it. I did comment earlier that there's still more garbage that goes on, and I guess it happens in all the states. And actually, I guess primary states, and some of them anyway, don't always nail it on the first go-round in terms of how many delegates, maybe they never nail it, in terms of how many delegates are going to be sent on behalf of whom, which candidates, to the national convention. But the caucuses, I know, they do this over and over again. You have your first alignment and the second alignment and the viability threshold, and they get the count, and I mean, I like the idea of getting a hold of these results. I don't know if I like the idea of how confusing they might end up being for some people, but maybe there's just going to be confused people out there, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I like getting all the data. And where did people line up when it didn't matter, when they didn't have a care in the world over whether or not they were viable or not? What were your preferences? I would like to know that. I would like to know whether any persuasive arguing. I'm glad I'm not part of it, but I would like to know if any of it had any effect. And then I do think it's an interesting test of sorts to have the realignment and to have the viability threshold forcing people to tell us about their second choices, because I think that's good information too. It's all very interesting. But then even when they announce the results, whatever they may be, on whether they get to the Monday night or Tuesday, then all those, I guess what they do in the second part of the action in the caucus is, okay, well, we now know who has won our local precinct caucus and how many, what percentage of the vote present today that candidate has, and then this one. So of all the candidates who passed the viability threshold, we divide up now the number of delegates that our precinct has been assigned based on our population, I guess, to go on to, and I don't know whether all states do it exactly this way, but they move up a step. Now the county caucus. So for each precinct sends a certain number of precinct level delegates to the county level caucus, where they do this again or something like it happens again. And from there, they move on to the statewide convention / caucus. And so not all states do things the same way, but we've had this described to us in the past. And I think and they no longer do this, right? But didn't Travis explain to us the Colorado caucusing system? And I don't know, did we get to the whole thing with the levels and everything? But imagine going through this again and again and again, and the results probably largely hold together because, after all, you're in favor of this candidate and they win the caucus on the first night there, and then they're not going to drop out in between. But I guess eventually some of them do, because they're so bad at predicting the eventual winner. But even announcing the stuff that matters, of course, is the delegate count to the national convention, and we won't know that for some time, and it can change and vary and wobble back and forth. Really a horrible process. But even I guess the primary system with other delegates who get to go to the national convention, not necessarily having been elected to it, but by virtue of their either superdelegate status or what have you. We still do have those. We just varied the rules by which they're allowed to vote and impact the nomination. But I guess the results are never there. So I guess I only point that out by way of minor defense of the Iowa system. I can't defend the system, really, but I can only point out that the fact that they won't be 100% clear in how the state will be represented at the national convention tonight, tomorrow night, or any night for months to come is not unique to Iowa necessarily. So, okay, fine. However, something that is, I think, at the moment anyway, unique to Iowa is their representation by Joni Ernst, who is terrible, of course, and commented over the weekend, sort of let the cat out of the bag, except that this particular cat has always been, this cat won't go in the bag for Republicans. Spent part of the weekend pointing out that, if Joe Biden were to win the election, Republicans would move to impeach him on day one over, Benghazi. It was actually Ukraine was the talking point, but might as well be Benghazi at this point. And I just thought that was, what can you do? She's looking to get in the paper, and there's focus on Iowa for the first time in a billion years because they're doing their caucuses. So she thought she could get in. Bloomberg News, not Bloomberg the candidate, but Bloomberg News was reporting this commentary, I guess. So Iowa Senator Joni Ernst warned Sunday. Look out for this warning. It's so super serious. So, by the way, Jennifer Epstein writing this piece for Bloomberg News, not the candidate, even though it's the same Bloomberg we're talking about. She warned on Sunday that Republicans could, she promised that they would, immediately push to impeach Joe Biden over his work in Ukraine as vice president if he wins the White House. I think this door of impeachable whatever has been opened, Ernst said in an interview with Bloomberg News. Joe Biden should be very careful what he's asking for. And he's not asking for this, by the way. Because, we can have a situation where if it should ever be President Biden, that immediately people, right the day after he would be elected, would be saying, well, we're going to impeach him. And, of course, this would be a novel approach to anything because Republicans have never said on day one or the day after they were elected they would impeach Barack Obama, except that they did, and I saw the bumper stickers that promised that they would. They didn't get around to it. And they said the same thing, of course, about Hillary Clinton, too. And, all I can say is I'm old enough to remember that when Democrats or anybody discussed the possibility of impeaching George W. Bush for actual reasons in 2004, 2005, well into his first term and the beginning of his second, the whole thing was dismissed, and you shouldn't be talking to those people because it's obviously tit for tat for Clinton. Clinton was impeached, so they're going to impeach the Republican president just to even the score. Couldn't really be any real reason for wanting to impeach George W. Bush, who was illegally wiretapping American citizens and detaining people indefinitely, including American citizens for no real reason, and torturing people, all impeachable offenses, of course. But really, you're just mad about Clinton. And that's a non-serious sort of thing, and we won't talk to you or discuss it. But Joni Ernst, by all means, have some headlines. I guess you could argue that they were not taking her seriously, but giving her a headline, ironically, to show everybody, look how crazy Joni Ernst is. But I don't think that anybody really argues that that's what they were doing. Anyway, it just reveals, I don't really need to be the one to tell you this. You guessed it right away. This reveals an awful lot about Republicans, and she's not at all out of the mainstream in this. And yes, Republicans absolutely would declare total war against Joe Biden or any Democrat from day one, and they would promise that the person would be impeached. And it's amazing because, let's see, I think as Hunter was saying over the weekend, that the same people that just told us hours before that impeachment was this horrible thing and it reversed the will of the voters and it was destabilizing, world destabilizing, to consider such a thing, have just promised to do such a thing because reasons. Now they're mad, so they definitely want to do that. Now their president has been impeached, but, in all likelihood will not be removed. So what are you so mad about? I'm not really sure, but they're mad. But they just wanted to let you know that the terrible thing that no one ever should do, they were going to do right away. Here's the tweet, as a matter of fact. So I'll be able to put this aside for you and share it with you later. What does it say? One of the problems with electing brick stupid people, that's Joni Ernst, to be senators is that they tend to say the willfully corrupt things out loud. Impeachment, this is a fake quote now. Don't accuse us of making up a dialogue here. Impeachment is a travesty that we must never ever do, and I demand we do it immediately when we're in charge, says the dumbass fascist, and I think that's about right. Well put there. And there were a couple of similarly good observations about that comment. including Philip Anderson's comment, saying the same people who told anyone who would listen that they would never confirm a Hillary Clinton SCOTUS pick and that they would impeach her over Benghazi, well, say the same thing now about Joe Biden. This is who they are. It would be great if Dems could finally come to grips with it. And also a good comment. We'll save that one for distribution later on. And there's more. How about this one? I was in agreement with this. Oh, look, I actually closed it all up and made it all go away, which was a bad idea. But let's see. I think it won't take us too long. We could certainly, was it John Walker's comment? I think that, this is a poor reflection, I would say. We had some pushback on this one, but I agreed with him on this. A poor reflection on Joe Biden's sales point. Here's how he put it. Very silly, the whole thing, the Joni Ernst thing, but a real blow to the Biden message that he alone can work with the GOP. They plan all-out war against him, and that's really true. And I don't know, we got some pushback from some Biden fans, which, it's okay to be a Biden fan. I don't, not taking anything away from you. But they were pretty sure that, well, no, you see, this actually strengthens the case for him because it shows that Republicans are so afraid of Biden. That must mean that they're the ones that he's the one that they think they might lose to. So they're going to do anything to keep him down. And you shouldn't fall for that. And you're I think the word was you're a rube if you do. And, that's actually a different point. I think John's point remains here. Biden, I don't know whether Biden believes it or not. I don't know whether I believe that Biden really and truly believes that he can actually reach across the aisle and work with Republican senators to get good things done and can have decent relations with them, or whether he thinks there's a lane for saying that, so I'll say it. I am not sure. I don't like to be unsure about such a thing, and it seems to me desperate and unrealistic, and I don't want to vote for people who are desperate and unrealistic if I have a choice, but sometimes in the end I don't end up having very much choice, and desperate and unrealistic is better than idiotic, horrific, bigoted, xenophobic, whatever else you might want to say about Donald Trump, or even in the primaries. I don't know. There are other things that can make me just as annoyed and upset. But I should stop with this already because it wasn't a major thing. Joni Ernst, of course, talking out of her hat, if you will, if you prefer that expression. Very unlikely that they will be in control of the House of Representatives and in a position to impeach anybody. Not even a really necessarily a good bet. It might not even be a particularly good bet that Joni Ernst makes it back, but I guess so. I mean, Iowa is Iowa, but you can always hold out hope. And I guess if you're putting yourself out there and making these stupid comments, it could perhaps drive turnout to change their representation. But yeah, not much that's going to be able to be done there. I think there was another similar threat from minority House Republicans over the weekend too, and it's like, yeah, you don't really get to do that, and not likely that you would take over the House anytime soon. Anything can happen, but as long as you remain in the minority, no, you don't get to do these sorts of things. I think there was somebody was floating a Republican floating some sort of rules change. We're going to, we're going to make it against the rules to XYZ. Well, you know what? You're not. You're not going to make anything against the rules. You don't have the power to do that, and you should just forget about it. Let's see. I think it's down here in the tweets somewhere. Yeah, there we are. Let's see. I saw this tweet I'll open it up and credit you properly. It was Jason Campbell from Media Matters for America saying, Mark Meadows. Mark Meadows isn't even going to be in Congress, much less in the minority. Isn't he moving on from Congress to some administration job? Mark Meadows, he says, is planning to propose the Trump rule, he would call it, banning the House from impeaching a president on, quote, strictly partisan lines, which I guess you could attempt if you were in the majority, but you're not. I mean, so Mark Meadows is going to submit a resolution that says, if I had my way, it would be, against the law to impeach a president unless you have a bipartisan result. And I don't know whether he plans to have a certain threshold or what. I know they keep discounting Justin Amash, and I guess they get to decide who's a Republican and who isn't. But they keep writing him out of history. And then, of course, you'd have a constitutional problem somewhere down the line. There's no chance that there would ever be a constitutional requirement that there be members of both parties must vote for something in order to validate it. A majority will do. Thank you very much. That's the way we run things. But a lot of attention grabbing, or attempts at attention grabbing over the weekend for partisan stunts like this that don't actually go anywhere because these people are in the minority and they can't make any of this work. Let me see. I'll put this, I don't know whether I marked this one or not for inclusion later on, but you shouldn't pay any attention to those things except beyond to pass on why you should not pay any attention to these things. Lots of other things that happened over the weekend that are part of the Twitter record, but I'm wondering whether maybe now would be a good time to head back to Pocket and try and pull out some of the larger stories that were worthy of discussion. How about some of the smaller bore stories first, just by way of warm-up? I have this one from SV Date, topical because, of course, large football game that occurred yesterday. He says the name of it right here in the headline. Boy, oh boy, we're going to be in trouble. Taxpayers get a $3.4 million tab so Trump can host Super Bowl party for his club members. I mean, a lesser outrage among many, of course, but, well worth adding to the collection, let's say. The president's latest trip to his Palm Beach resort and nearby golf course brings the taxpayer-funded total for his golfing hobby to $130.4 million. SV Date on that beat for HuffPost. But here's the finer angle on the story. Taxpayers shelled out another $3.4 million to send President Donald Trump to Florida this weekend so he could host a Super Bowl party for paying guests at his for-profit golf course. Was it at the golf course that they had the party? Yeah, I guess so. It wasn't even at Mar-a-Lago. The president's official schedule shows him spending 2.5 hours Sunday evening at a Super Bowl 54, because that's what it was, watch party at Trump International Golf Club in West Palm Beach. Tickets sold for $75 each, and that's not even a lot. But were only available to members of the club, obviously. The initiation fee for which reportedly runs around $450,000, with annual dues costing several thousands of dollars more. And, so that's an interesting thing that we shouldn't, but somehow do allow the president to do, that he can just go down and do these money-making ventures. And, it's important to the club to have a Super Bowl watch party, and they'll all pay to come to the Super Bowl watch party if the president is there, because they'll be able to, illegally influence him, probably. And maybe even talk him into accepting foreign interference in our elections, or something fun like that. Well, let's see. Why would you have to go down there? There's an interesting thought here, too, from Robert Weissman of Public Citizen. He says, obviously there are no TVs in the White House, so what alternative did he have? He could have saved money, though, by chartering a plane and flying all the club members to watch the game at the White House. It would have cost even less for the American taxpayer, I guess. In response to a query, the White House press secretary Stephanie Grisham defended Trump's trip and attacked HuffPost. Who knew that she would try that? The premise of your story is ridiculous and false and just more left-wing media bias on display. The president never stops working. And that includes when he is at the Winter White House, which is not A, the Winter White House, nor B, where he actually was. But whatever. Her phrase, Winter White House, SV Date points out here, refers, of course, to Mar-a-Lago, the for-profit resort in Palm Beach that is several miles east of the golf course, and that doubled its initiation fee from $100,000 to $200,000 after Trump was elected in 2016. Trump frequently mingles with guests at social events there. On Saturday, for example, Trump appeared at a dinner at Mar-a-Lago arranged by the Trumpettes, who I think are responsible for about 60% of the bookings of the dining room and banquet halls at Mar-a-Lago these days. So the Trumpettes did a Saturday dinner. The dinner did not appear on the president's publicly released schedule, and in any case was a campaign event, not an official one. When a pool reporter asked the White House on Saturday what work Trump did over the weekend, the reply was that he had calls and, quote, meetings with staff. The president did not attend a rally on Saturday for Venezuelan leader Juan Guaido. That's good because I guess he was, I don't know, why would he do that? But I guess that's a big deal that he didn't. This rally for this Venezuelan leader, whom the United States and other governments have recognized as the legitimate president of that country, I guess Venezuela maybe has yet to come around on that. That rally began while Trump was still at his golf course, and attending it could have made him late for the start of the Trumpettes dinner. So I don't know why that was supposed to be a big deal, but okay. Trump promised during his presidential campaign that he would separate himself from his businesses if he won, as you know. However, he reneged on that vow, as well as his promise to release his tax returns. Is it worth continuing and all this? I think this is just standard Trump is the most corrupt person in the world stories, which, you know, I feel bad about skipping because you should never skip stories about how horrible and corrupt he is, and you should remind yourself every day. But we'll just remind ourselves in other ways, probably, if we move on from this story. All right, let's see. Other things. Do we stay here in pocket? Sure, why not? Let's see. Here was a fun piece that I thought might make for good Monday sharing. Alexandra Petri writing at Washington Post on that crazy notion that Republicans still cling to with respect to impeachment about overturning the will of the voters. And she asks, dare we overturn the will of the voters by holding another election? It's not just impeachment that overturns the 2016 election, right? The 2020 election could do it. I have been quite full of consternation. Everyone who has seen me commented about how concerned I look. I think a shot at the visibly upset thing. Anyway, she was so concerned looking at all these so-called impeachment, so-called proceedings. How dare the Congress, a body full of partisans whose diets are restricted to milk, water, and loose individual candies from a Pennsylvanian's desk, act as though they have the right to remove a duly elected president of the United States, a man who embodies the will of the voters. How dare they do this? Donald J. Trump. Some would argue that the actions of a body of directly elected representatives, selected by the very same voters, but more recently, would better reflect their will than an election 4 years ago, but we all know that's nonsense. The will of the voters found its highest and best expression in the election of President Trump, and anything that seems likely to remove him from power or even just inconvenience him a little goes against their will. If the founders had wanted it to be possible to legitimately remove from office a president the people had selected, they would have made 3 equal branches of government and devised a specific mechanism for this to occur by a 2/3 vote or something. This is why the prospect of another election fills me with so much alarm. We know the voters want Donald J. Trump. They said so resoundingly with a minority of their votes in 2016. Dare we risk overturning that election by holding another? Suppose he were not to win it. That would certainly go against the will of the voters. It would be just as much an overturning of 2016's result as this impeachment is. Perhaps more so because Mike Pence would not immediately get to become president afterward. Indeed, if the founders wanted one thing when they rose up against George III, King George III, it was to be certain that the United States would be governed by a person who could not be removed from power, and certainly not in a partisan way. The evils of partisanship cannot be too strongly stated. The idea that the country might be divided into groups of people who favor certain things, that they might elect people who agree that they favor certain things, and that those people might gather to enact those things through a majority vote over the wishes of a minority that would have been anathema to the founders. This is a difficult to tell from the Constitution, but easy to tell if you feed the Constitution to a goat, sacrifice the goat, and observe its entrails carefully. What a method. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday, but our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Shall we continue with this? There's only a little bit left. We might as well get all the way through it. I like the premise of it, certainly, so we deserve to finish it. I love the will of the voters, she continues, and I truly cannot think of anything that would overturn it more than an election that did not result in placing Donald J. Trump in power. Cavillers and quibblers, that's a good one, complain that technically Donald J. Trump's original election was not what a majority wanted. But you see, that just goes to show that the will of the voters is a different thing from what the majority of the voters want. This is complicated stuff. A free, fair election that could possibly deliver the presidency into someone else's hands, how is that fair? Of course, not holding an election feels a little anti-democratic, but we have already canceled a whole slew of Republican primaries since the will of the voters was already so clear that no vote was needed. We had better not stop until the voters are assured of getting what they want. And in the instance that we foolishly hold an election, we should leave no doubt that interference is welcome for the will of the voters, of course. So, great points there, of course. Well spoofed and worth our time, I think. There's lots of other things to get to, and I'm trying to decide, since we're headed back to actually discussing the impeachment of the president, we might want to hit on some of the things that have to do with that. Let's see. I guess most important among them, but not longest among them, is this story developing, let's say, Friday and into the weekend, I think. Will I be getting rid of this ad if I click this box or something else? Oh, well, screw it. Ruined everything. All right, ready? CNN had this story that I think is important for consideration. Not that it's important to the consideration that senators are giving to the question of impeachment, but once again, the continual drip of incriminating information related to this particular impeachment and other reasons to impeach him. And I guess I'll just throw in a pitch once again for, I know that the likelihood of House Democrats being this brave and forthright is minimal. But they should absolutely be. We should absolutely be talking publicly and frequently about impeaching Trump again, maybe even on the same charges because of the slow drip of information on these charges. And so long as we're focused on them, I mean, maybe you twist the knife best on these senators by showing that even on this narrow impeachment, skinny impeachment, as people, they're still wrong. But whether or not we'll get to that, I don't know. I think Democrats in the House will largely say, we've done the work here. We have our issue for November. And no one will forget what happened in January and February come November, right? So they'll all remember that stuff because it happened in the same year and everything. They can't possibly forget. In this, we say this in the middle of the longest continual streak of days that feel like weeks or even months that I can remember. This political cycle, this news cycle, cries out for reminding everybody daily how bad this is. Anyway, this is the story that CNN was reporting. Trump administration reveals it's blocking, can you believe it, dozens of emails about Ukraine aid freeze, including president's role. Caitlin Polance reporting this one on Saturday. Is that right? Yeah, okay. Let me give you the story. The Department of Justice revealed in a court filing late Friday, right after all the votes to refuse to have any witnesses or admit any more evidence, they told the courts, oh yeah, by the way, there's much more evidence, but we're going to continue to withhold it from everybody. But you guys just go decide your case without that stuff. The DOJ revealed in a court filing late Friday that it has 24 emails related to President Donald Trump's involvement in the withholding of millions in security assistance to Ukraine. Have you heard about that? It's a disclosure that came just hours after the Senate voted against subpoenaing additional witnesses and documents in Trump's impeachment trial, like perhaps these documents, paving the way for his acquittal, supposedly. The filing, released near midnight Friday, that would have been the deadline, I'm sure, marks the official acknowledgement from the first official acknowledgement from the Trump administration that emails about the president's thinking related to the aid exist, and that he was directly involved in asking about and deciding on the aid as early as June. The administration is still blocking those emails from the public and has successfully kept them from Congress, and that's problematic. In other words, for all the screaming from Republicans who are voting not to subpoena any additional witnesses or documents, that the case is unproven, and even if we had other witnesses, you're never going to get any evidence that gets to the president's thinking, his state of mind when he was making this decision. Except, as it turns out, there is documentary evidence of the president's thinking and his state of mind when he was making this decision, and even evidence that he was working on making this decision much, much earlier than originally understood. So, whatever. Why would you want direct evidence of the president's thinking on this, even though it seems that Republicans insisted that that information was critical? Oh well. Anyway, a lawyer with the Office of Management and Budget wrote to the court that 24 emails between June and September of 2019, including an internal discussion among DoD officials called POTUS Follow-Up on June 24th, should stay confidential because the emails describe communications by either the president, the vice president, or the president's immediate advisors regarding presidential decision-making about the scope, duration, and purpose of the hold on military assistance to Ukraine. In other words, I think in common parlance, it would be, they're saying that they would claim executive privilege blocks the release of these documents to Congress or to anyone else. Trump's decision and by the way, I guess, let me just take this moment to expand on that a little bit. If you took at face value, but never necessarily thoroughly understood the reasoning behind the existing precedent, sometimes cited by me, by Armando, by others in the media, for the premise that, I don't know how I've woven this sentence together. I forgot already. But anyway, the premise that impeachment, or the impeachment context, trumps, no pun intended, the claims of executive privilege. That executive privilege is of little or no use in the impeachment context because the Congress's interest in impeachment, the highest, perhaps the highest calling of the Congress outside of actually doing its goddamn job and legislating, is reviewing the activities of the presidency, right? The Congress's interest in getting to the bottom of it overrules executive privilege is the usual understanding that comes out of the precedents of the Nixon near impeachment, because there were court rulings that said, look, we've been asked to decide on this. How do we resolve the contest between executive privilege, which usually works pretty well in blocking public access to documents, and impeachment, which is sort of the ultimate manifestation of the Congress's checking and balancing power as against the executive. How do we balance those two things, the irresistible force and immovable object there? And the answer that was given in the past was, well, executive privilege fails as against congressional inquiries in an impeachment context. And ordinarily, executive privilege wins in a simple, straightforward case, so that you might say subpoena the president or the White House or some executive branch department or whatever, and they claim executive privilege, and then you're asked to decide, all right, well, how serious an infraction do we think is outlined here? You could simply move to impeach, theoretically, just because you're being denied access to the documents. But if they're documents about some minor infraction, you might just say, well, we'll move here to the Pat Philbin's famed accommodation phase here, where we'll try to find some other instrument to either force your hand or simply negotiate for the release of some of this information in exchange for I don't know what. But you don't go to the ultimate remedy of impeachment unless, of course, the information being hidden, it pertains to something which itself, some underlying problem which itself might necessitate the removal of the president. Why, though, would the courts rule that way? And I think this particular example helps put a fine enough point on it that we would double around to talk about a little bit. Remember, what we're talking about here is these are documents that, emails that go directly to the point of explaining the president's thinking on something. Usually, executive privilege blocks public access to this sort of information. When they use the executive privilege, it's usually the decision-making privilege that they're referring to. It's the president needs to be able to solicit honest opinion from his advisors on any given subject so that he can, weigh the various options and make the best decision. And that makes a certain amount of sense outside of the context of Donald Trump, because, of course, the likelihood that Donald Trump is weighing several options with the idea in mind that he will make the best decision in the interest of the country at the end of the process is just ridiculous. That's just not happening. So I would argue that the foundation for claiming executive privilege is just missing with Donald Trump. But I don't think any court would buy it. But honestly, they really should, and maybe in a different context they would, but they don't want to be seen doing it here, because it requires them ruling, well, he's mentally unfit and incapable of making decisions in the interest of the country. And that's a hell of a conclusion to reach, and courts aren't going to want to do it. But I've reached that conclusion. But more than that, typically the executive privilege thing is about, well, like I said, the president needs to be able to solicit advice without worrying that the solicitation of the advice or that the advice itself would get people into trouble or see them, in danger of losing their office simply by offering up an opinion in a, official or unofficial context. But the reason that executive privilege ends up getting trumped, again, no pun intended, in the impeachment context is that very often you will find that when called upon to make this momentous decision of whether or not to remove a president from office, it very often will hinge on, well, it makes a difference what the president was trying to do here, what he was thinking here. If it is simply, and this goes back to the discussion we had at the end of last week about the differences between maladministration and abuse of office, and that thing which might fall in between, which, what did we term it again? Misconduct in office. But surely the difference between maladministration and abuse of office, that would seem very often to have a very strong component of understanding the president's motivations. And that's extremely difficult to prove normally. And there are lots of Republicans who would say that, for instance, well, you can't vote. I can't vote to convict and therefore remove him from office without knowing, as I would be asked to know in a criminal proceeding in an Article III court, knowing his state of mind or knowing his thoughts and what his motivations were. And without that, without being positive of that, we can't tell the difference between maladministration, a bad decision-making choice, and abuse of office, a conscious decision. I forget the terminology we used to use for these things, both in law and in philosophy, but a conscious decision, malice aforethought, it would be the legal terminology that gets used, and I guess that's the most relevant part. Why think about it philosophically, and I'll see if I can't get my finger on those terms as we go on. But a malice aforethought, when that's required for a conviction in a criminal context, if you analogize that to the impeachment context, it's a convenient excuse because it's probably pretty rare that there's concrete evidence left behind of the president's inner thoughts, if Donald Trump can be said to have inner thoughts about anything in this. But as it turns out, where it might exist, courts would be willing to entertain overruling executive privilege, given how important the question before the Congress in an impeachment context is, and what senators feel they need in order to make the decision. And so it shouldn't be terribly surprising, except now in the era of partisan courts, that courts would say, it actually is important for Congress to have access, even if it's just reviewed confidentially in a what would now be a SCIF sort of situation. Even if they need to be able to know, and if you have that documented, well then reveal it to them. They could still decide not to remove him from office, but at least now the question will be fairly decided. Well, it won't be now because, of course, the courts will probably never let them have that and will invent new reasons for executive privilege to prevail over Congress's subpoena power, even in an impeachment context, and that will immediately reverse itself when the president is a Democrat again next time. So, where do we leave off with the story before having this side discussion? Right about here, I would think. Trump's decision to withhold nearly $400 million in U.S. military aid to Ukraine as he pressed the country to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, his potential 2020 general election rival, that's Joe, of course. Hunter should run. Why not? We'll put him up instead. Are at the center of the president's impeachment trial, you see. Trump and his allies have repeatedly made unfounded and false claims to allege that the Bidens acted corruptly in Ukraine. That's a nice inclusion for CNN. By the way, no mention so far on the show of the fact that I guess Sean Hannity conducted an interview with the president that was to air in or around the Super Bowl. I missed the whole thing. I only happened to notice on Twitter that the president spent an important part of his super important interview on this super important Super Bowl type day telling people about Hunter Biden and how bad he was, and also Joe Biden looks sleepy, and a couple other dumb things. Anyway, Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said in a statement on Saturday, every single Republican senator voted to endorse the White House cover-up of these potentially important truth-revealing emails. Make no mistake, the full truth will eventually come out, it will, and Republicans will have to answer for why they were so determined to enable the president to hide it. The Senate on Friday defeated an attempt to subpoena documents and witnesses, which could have revealed more about the actions of Trump and the officials closest to him related to Ukraine. Senate leadership on Wednesday plans to hold the final vote to acquit Trump on charges of abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. That's their plan, anyway. Government officials testified in the House's impeachment inquiry to the existence of what appears to be some of these emails. The day after DOD issued its June 18th press release announcing $250 million in security assistance funds for Ukraine, President Trump started asking OMB questions about the funding for Ukraine, the House outlined in its impeachment report. The House noted that the OMB refused to turn over any of the documents when subpoenaed during the probe, and that emails may exist showing acting White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, yes, acting, I'll forget the sound effect here, passing along the president's order to halt the aid to Ukraine. The committees also have good faith reason to believe that the Office of Management and Budget is in possession of and continues to withhold significantly more documents and records responsive to the subpoena and of direct relevance to the impeachment inquiry, the House wrote before it voted to impeach the president for obstruction of Congress. The filings from the executive branch came Friday to meet a court-ordered January 31st deadline. A judge had specifically asked for an email-by-email breakdown of what the Justice Department redacted or withheld in Defense Department and OMB emails about the aid and why it did so after the Center for Public Integrity sued and got access to them in December through the Freedom of Information Act. So once again, FOIA activity at the heart of most of these revelations, but not getting us all the way to what we want. But eventually, I guess all this leaks out. And I guess the Democratic plan is to hope that Republicans are super duper embarrassed about all this. But we'll see. All right, let's see. Other fun and interesting notes that have to do with impeachment. Well, you should take some time perhaps to review. We won't read all the way through it. I don't know whether we made mention of this or not. I'm going to search in Pocket. I feel like I put a story like this away because it's something I've heard before. But since Jay Sekulow, likely to be haunting your television set for some portion of the next 3 days to come, perhaps you want to give this some thought. Charities steered $65 million to Trump lawyer Sekulow and family. This, according to the AP's Michael Biesecker. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. You might want to check into the background of this one. I'll give you a couple of lead paragraphs here to take away some flavor for what happened. Jay Sekulow, one of the president's lead attorneys during the impeachment trial, is being paid for his legal work through a rented $80 a month mailbox a block away from the White House. This is the big fancy law firm that Jay Sekulow must come from. It's a Pennsylvania Avenue mailbox that appears to be the sole physical location of the Constitutional Litigation and Advocacy Group, a for-profit corporation owned by Sekulow. The firm has no website. It is not listed in the national legal directories. The District of Columbia Bar has no record of it, and no attorneys list it as their employer. But Sekulow, 63, is registered as chief counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice, a non-profit Christian legal advocacy group based in an expansive Capitol Hill row house, probably also expansive, a short walk from the Senate chamber. A half dozen lawyers employed by the nonprofit ACLJ are named in recent Senate legal briefs as members of Trump's defense team, including, if you notice this on day one of the proceedings, one of Sekulow's sons. Yes, true. The ACLJ is a tax-exempt 501c3 organization and as such is barred under IRS rules from engaging in partisan political activities. Weird, right? The Republican National Committee has paid more than $250,000 to Sekulow's for-profit CLA group since 2017, when he was first named to Trump's legal team as part of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. Sekulow has been one of Trump's most visible defenders, enduring as a trusted attorney for the president, even as other of his lawyers have been sidelined or entangled in controversy. At the impeachment trial, he sought to present Trump as unfairly hounded by investigators, seizing on surveillance errors by the FBI that they acknowledged making in the Russia probe, and accusing Democrats of investigating the president over Ukraine simply because they couldn't bring him down after the Mueller investigation. Anyway, much more interesting stuff about the web of organizations and charities that he maintains, not unlike the way Newt Gingrich moved money around through 501c3 organizations, skirting the law at every turn. But very interesting. $65 million plus, I guess, paid to Sekulow and various members of his family, more or less laundered through non-profit supposed charitable organizations. So there's a lot going on the charity front. You should take a look at that. Another story that is now a couple of weeks old, but perhaps also worth some mention, and I probably plan to get this later in the week, but since I've sort of segued into it, I'll alert you to this one. Reported the other day by Politico, Trump allies are handing out cash to black voters. Organizers have begun holding events in black communities where they lavish praise on the president while handing out thousands of dollars in giveaways. Now, how could that be happening? Wouldn't it be illegal? Well, yeah, sure. But, you'll make a complaint to the FEC. The FEC will be deadlocked on it. They won't be able to make a decision. The whole thing will drag out past the election, and either the strategy works or it doesn't work, at which point, if it works, you could be impeaching the president for this one, and then everyone would say, once again, we're back into the same circle. Ben Schreckinger, reporting for Politico on this one. Again, we'll give you just a couple paragraphs to take away and review on your own, but we may dive back into this in the future. Allies of Donald Trump have been holding events in black communities where organizers lavish praise on the president as they hand out tens of thousands of dollars to lucky attendees. The first giveaway took place last month in Cleveland. That would have been December, actually, where recipients whose winning tickets are drawn from a bin landed cash gifts in increments of several $100s stuffed into envelopes. The second giveaway that was supposedly scheduled for Virginia, I guess in January, according to the story anyway, has been postponed, and more are said to be in the works. The tour, there's a tour of these events, comes as Trump's campaign has been investing its own money to make inroads with black voters and erode Democrats' overwhelming advantage with them. But the cash giveaways, you see, are organized under the auspices of an outside charity, the Urban Revitalization Coalition, permitting donors to remain anonymous and make their contributions tax deductible. The organizers say the events are run by the book and intend to promote economic development in inner cities. But the group behind the cash giveaways is registered as a 501c3 charitable organization. However, one leading legal expert on nonprofit law said the arrangement raises questions about the group's tax-exempt status because it does not appear to be vetting the recipients of its money for legitimate charitable need. On the other hand, giving out money is always a good thing. It's nice. Anyway, charities are required by law to spend their money on charitable and educational activities, said Marcus Owens, a former director of the Exempt Organizations Division at the Internal Revenue Service, who's now in private practice at the law firm of Loeb and Loeb. It's not immediately clear to me how simply giving money away to people at an event is a charitable act. Although, it's tough times out there, right? I guess it's not difficult to imagine. But, and of course, if you make a stink about it and actually sued about it, they would, I'm sure, answer, oh, sure, because people of color are helping one another out in economically difficult times. Farmers can get all kinds of handouts, and nobody says boo. Well, we do say boo. But, let the black community do it, and, I think they'll be effective in making that claim, too. Anyway, asked about the legality of the giveaways in a brief phone interview, the Urban Revitalization Coalition's CEO, Darrell Scott, said that most gifts were between $300 and $500, and that the group mandates that anyone who receives over $600 fills out a W-9 form in order to ensure compliance with tax law. He did not respond to follow-up questions about how the giveaways were structured and whether they met the legal standards for a charitable act. Scott declined to name the donors funding the effort. I'd rather not. He said they prefer to remain anonymous. So we may or may not find out exactly who is funding these things. It's very clever in the sense that they will probably get away with it and not be called out on it until A, it's too late, and B, maybe never be called out on it because the FTC is deadlocked, etc., etc. Just thought I would make you aware of that activity going on. I'm sure it'll come up again in the near future. Anyway, it is time for us to relinquish the microphone, although I am not certain whether or not Justice Putnam will be able to bring you his program today. It turns out he's got some computer problems going on. He may be able to produce a podcast of the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy for later on, but it's been rather a tough morning for him. So wish him well with his computer problems and hope he's up and running soon, because there's an awful lot out there that we didn't get to today and we'll never get to tomorrow, Wednesday, or the next, that he covers as a matter of course, which is a great reason for having him follow up the show, plus of course him running the whole radio network and all that.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com, you have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, well, we're done for the day today, and I guess time to start heading over towards the TV to watch the wrap-up of the impeachment trial. Some more speeches today and tomorrow, votes on Wednesday, but let's keep an ear to the ground and see what else drips out of the evidence pool that they've been hiding.